Mars often appears in our thoughts as a quiet promise, a nearby world, a red horizon that feels close enough to imagine standing on. For decades, stories, images, and plans have slowly shaped the idea that Mars could become a second home for humanity. It's a natural idea. Humans have always moved, explored, and settled new places. On Earth, this pattern feels almost effortless. We cross oceans, climb mountains, adapt to cold, heat, and altitude. So it can feel intuitive to assume that, with enough technology, we could simply extend that pattern to another planet. But tonight, we are not looking at Mars through imagination or ambition. We are looking at it through biology. Mars is a place. It is real, solid, and measurable. It has gravity, sunlight, soil, and a long geological history. But a place is not automatically a living environment. An environment is something more specific. It is a set of conditions that allow a particular kind of organism to maintain itself, develop, and continue across generations. Human biology is not flexible in the way machines are flexible. It does not reconfigure itself freely for any setting it enters. Every system in the human body, bones, muscles, blood, organs, and cells, was shaped under a very narrow range of conditions. Those conditions were not abstract. They were physical. They were constant. They were provided by Earth. This is not a philosophical claim. It is a biological one. For billions of years, life on Earth developed under the same gravitational pull, the same atmospheric pressure, and the same protective shielding from radiation. Generation after generation formed, survived, and reproduced within those boundaries. Human biology is the result of that long, unbroken process. Not just our appearance, but the invisible rules that keep our cells functioning from moment to moment. When we imagine living on Mars, it's easy to think in terms of survival. Can we breathe? Can we eat? Can we stay warm? These are important questions, but they are not the deepest ones. Survival describes staying alive for a time. Biology is concerned with something quieter and more demanding: maintenance, development, continuation. A human body is not simply built and then left alone. It is constantly being rebuilt. Bone is broken down and reformed. Muscle is renewed. Blood cells are replaced. DNA is copied and repaired. All of these processes assume certain background conditions are always present. On Earth, those conditions require no effort. Gravity is always there. Atmospheric pressure presses gently and consistently on every surface of the body. Radiation is filtered and softened long before it reaches our cells. Because these factors never change, the body never learned how to function without them. Mars differs from Earth not in dramatic, explosive ways, but in quiet, persistent ones. Its gravity is weaker, its atmosphere is thin, its magnetic protection is absent. None of these differences feel urgent in a single moment, but biology does not respond to moments. It responds to years, to decades, to lifetimes. The question we are beginning to explore is not whether humans could visit Mars. That is a question of engineering and planning. The deeper question is whether the human body, as a living system shaped by Earth, can sustain itself in Martian conditions without slowly breaking down. Tonight we will move carefully through that question, one system at a time. Not with fear and not with urgency, just with attention. Because understanding where life can exist is part of understanding what life is. Mars exists as a real location in space. It has mountains, valleys, ice, dust, and a long history written into its surface. Robotic explorers have mapped it in detail. We know its seasons, its temperatures, and the chemistry of its soil. Because of this familiarity, Mars can begin to feel approachable, almost familiar. But there is an important distinction that is easy to overlook. A place is not the same thing as an environment that supports life. On Earth, we rarely separate these ideas. Everywhere humans have lived, the environment already supported us. Even in harsh regions, deserts, polar ice, high mountains, The underlying conditions remained within the range human biology can tolerate. Gravity was constant. Air pressure stayed near the same baseline. Radiation exposure remained low enough for our cells to repair the damage it caused. Mars does not meet those conditions. An environment that supports life does more than prevent immediate death. It allows the body to maintain itself without constant loss. It allows development to proceed normally. And most importantly, it allows one generation to give rise to the next without accumulating damage. When scientists describe Mars as habitable, they usually mean something very specific. They mean that liquid water might exist briefly under certain conditions. They mean that microbes, if they ever existed, could have survived at some point in the past. They do not mean that complex organisms like humans can live there indefinitely. Human bodies are not passive occupants of space. They are active systems continuously interacting with their surroundings. Every second they are sensing forces, pressures, and chemical gradients. They use this information to regulate growth, repair, and balance. On Earth, this interaction is stable. The signals the body receives today are nearly identical to the signals it received yesterday. Because of that stability, the body can fine-tune itself over a lifetime. Mars changes the signal. Its gravity pulls less strongly. Its atmosphere presses less firmly. Its lack of magnetic shielding allows more energetic particles to pass through tissue. Each of these differences alters the information the body uses to decide how to maintain itself. In the short term, the body can cope. Humans are remarkably resilient for days, weeks, even months. But resilience is not the same as sustainability. Think of the difference between holding your breath and breathing. You can hold your breath for a time. Your body tolerates the interruption. But holding your breath is not a mode of living. It's a temporary deviation from what your biology requires. Mars represents a similar deviation. It allows temporary occupation with technological support. Pressurized habitats can provide air. Heaters can provide warmth. Radiation shelters can reduce exposure. But technology does not change what the body expects from its environment. It only delays the consequences of unmet expectations. Living somewhere in the biological sense means that the environment itself supplies the signals the body needs to remain stable. On Mars, those signals are incomplete or altered. The body compensates, adapts as best it can, and in doing so begins to change. These changes are subtle at first. They do not announce themselves dramatically. They appear as small shifts in how tissues maintain themselves, how fluids move, how cells respond to stress. Over time, those small shifts accumulate. This is why the question of Mars is not about comfort or convenience. It is about whether an environment provides the basic physical inputs that human biology assumes will always be present. Mars is a place we can reach. It is a place we can study. It is even a place we can occupy for a while. But whether it is a place we can live is a different question entirely. And answering that question requires us to look closely at how deeply Earth is written into the human body. It is tempting to think of the human body as adaptable in a broad general way. We see people living in cold regions, hot regions, high altitudes and near sea level. From the outside, this looks like flexibility. It looks like evidence that humans can adjust to almost anything. But this impression is misleading. Human adaptation on Earth happens within a narrow biological envelope. The temperature may change, the humidity may change, oxygen levels may drop slightly at high altitude, yet the deepest physical conditions remain unchanged. Gravity does not vary. Atmospheric pressure stays close to the same range. Radiation exposure remains low and stable. These constants form the background that all other adaptations rely on. The human body is not a general-purpose survival platform. It is not designed to accept arbitrary environmental inputs and reorganize itself freely. Instead, it is a highly specialized system, optimized for a specific set of conditions. This specialization exists at every level. At the level of organs, the heart assumes it must pump blood upward against a steady gravitational pull. The lungs assume a certain pressure difference to exchange oxygen efficiently. The kidneys assume a predictable distribution of fluids in the body. At the level of tissues, bones assume regular mechanical loading. Muscles assume resistance is always present. Blood vessels assume gravity will pull blood downward unless actively countered. At the level of cells, DNA repair systems assume a certain background level of radiation damage. Metabolic pathways assume specific pressure and temperature ranges. Even the way proteins fold inside cells depends on stable physical conditions. These assumptions are not conscious. They are built into the structure of the body itself. When those assumptions are violated, the body does not fail immediately. Instead, it begins adjusting. It reduces what it no longer thinks it needs. It reallocates resources. It changes the way tissues are maintained. This process looks like adaptation, but it comes with a cost. If gravity is lower, the body assumes less structural support is required. If resistance is reduced, it assumes less muscle is needed. If radiation increases, repair systems work harder, but also make more mistakes. The body is always trying to match itself to the environment it senses. It does not know whether those signals represent a temporary situation or a permanent one. It simply responds. On Earth, this strategy works beautifully because the signals are consistent across a lifetime. On Mars, the signals are different and the body responds accordingly. Importantly, this response is not reversible unless the original conditions return. When astronauts come back to Earth, many changes slowly reverse because gravity, pressure, and shielding are restored. The body receives the old signals again and rebuilds what it lost. On Mars, there is no return signal. The environment never tells the body to rebuild to Earth standards. It only continues reinforcing the reduced inputs. This is the key misunderstanding behind many visions of Mars settlement. The assumption is that humans are flexible enough that, given enough time, they will simply adapt. But adaptation does not mean improvement. It means adjustment to what is available. And when what is available is less than what the body evolved to require, adjustment takes the form of gradual loss. Understanding this helps clarify the nature of the challenge ahead. The difficulty of living on Mars is not that humans are weak. It is that human biology is precise. It works extremely well under the conditions it was built for. When we live on Earth, it is easy to feel that its conditions are ordinary. Gravity is something we rarely think about. Air feels invisible. Radiation is not something we notice in daily life. Because these factors are constant, they fade into the background. They feel neutral, almost accidental, but they are not. Every aspect of the human body reflects the fact that these conditions were always present. Not occasionally, not approximately, continuously. Earth's gravity has remained remarkably stable for billions of years. That steady pull shaped how cells sense force, how tissues form, and how organs organize themselves. The body learned, through evolution, to use gravity as a reliable reference. Earth's atmosphere provides more than oxygen. Its pressure gently supports the structure of the lungs, the blood vessels, and even the way fluids are distributed inside cells. That pressure is part of the physical context in which every heartbeat and every breath occurs. Earth's magnetic field and thick atmosphere quietly shield life from most high-energy radiation. This protection allows DNA repair systems to operate within manageable limits. Damage still happens, but slowly enough for repair mechanisms to keep pace. None of this was designed. It emerged through long interaction between life and planet. Organisms that matched Earth's conditions survived and reproduced. Those that did not disappeared. Humans are the result of this long filtering process. Every biological system in the body assumes Earth's conditions as the baseline, not because Earth is special in a cosmic sense, but because it is the environment that shaped us. This is why Earth cannot be treated as interchangeable with other planets. Mars may share some similarities. It has a day length close to ours. It has seasons. it has a solid surface. But beneath those surface similarities, the fundamental physical context is different. Gravity on Mars is weaker, atmospheric pressure is dramatically lower, radiation exposure is much higher. From the body's perspective, these differences are not cosmetic. They change the meaning of basic signals that guide maintenance and development. On Earth, when bones experience a certain level of stress, the body interprets that as normal. On Mars, that same level of stress never arrives. On Earth, when blood shifts downward, the body knows how to respond. On Mars, that signal is muted or absent. The body does not know it is on another planet. It only knows the inputs it receives, and it adjusts itself accordingly. This is why the challenge of Mars is not about bravery or endurance. It is about mismatch. The human organism is matched to Earth in thousands of small interconnected ways. Remove those matches and the body does not protest loudly. It simply begins to change. These changes are not mistakes. They are the body doing exactly what it evolved to do, responding to its environment. The problem is that the environment it is responding to is one it was never meant to inhabit permanently. Understanding this helps us shift our perspective. Mars is not hostile because it is dangerous in an obvious way. It is hostile because it quietly fails to provide what human biology assumes will always be there. Gravity is often described as a force that holds us to the ground. But for the human body, gravity is more than a pull, it is information. Every moment you're upright, gravity applies a constant load to your tissues. Bones feel it. Muscles resist it. Blood moves in response to it. Nerves use it as reference to determine orientation and balance. The body does not experience gravity as a single sensation. Instead, gravity appears as countless small signals distributed throughout the body. Pressure in joints, tension in muscles, fluid shifting inside blood vessels, microscopic deformations in bone tissue. Together, these signals tell the body how much structure is needed. Bone cells sense strain and decide how much mineral to maintain. Muscle fibers sense resistance and decide how much mass to keep. Blood vessels sense pressure gradients and adjust their thickness and elasticity. The heart senses workload and adjusts its shape and strength. This process happens continuously and automatically. There is no central controller deciding how strong bones should be, or how large muscles should remain. Each tissue responds locally to the forces it experiences. On Earth, this system works quietly and efficiently because gravity never changes. The signal is stable across days, years, and entire lifetimes. The body learns that this level of force is normal and necessary. Mars alters that signal. With only about 38% of Earth's gravity, every load in the body is reduced. Bones experience less compression, muscles experience less resistance, blood experiences weaker downward pull. The body does not interpret this as a temporary anomaly. It interprets it as the new normal. When signals decrease, maintenance decreases. The body assumes it is overbuilt for its environment and begins adjusting downward. This adjustment is not a failure of biology. It is biology working exactly as intended. If gravity is lower, the body concludes that less structure is required. Maintaining unnecessary tissue costs energy. Evolution favoured organisms that avoided wasting energy. So when signals drop, the body conserves resources by reducing what it no longer thinks it needs. This is why gravity is best understood not as a background condition, but as a continuous instruction. It tells the body how strong, how dense and how robust it must remain. On Mars, that instruction is incomplete. The body still receives gravity-based signals, but they are weaker than those it evolved to rely on. As a result, the body gradually recalibrates itself to a lower standard. This recalibration does not happen overnight. It unfolds over weeks, months, and years. At first, changes are subtle, then they become measurable. Eventually, they become limiting. understanding gravity as a biological signal helps explain why technological solutions struggle to fully compensate. You can add exercise, you can add mechanical loads for short periods, but you cannot recreate the continuous all-day signal that gravity provides simply by existing on Earth. On Mars, gravity is always telling the body the same thing: you need less. When people first hear that Mars has lower gravity, it often sounds appealing. Moving would feel lighter, lifting objects would require less effort, joints would experience less strain. From a mechanical perspective, this seems like a benefit, but biology does not evaluate conditions based on comfort. It evaluates them based on signals. On Mars, gravity is not absent. It is simply weaker. About 38% of what your body expects. That number matters more than it sounds. Every system that relies on gravity receives only part of the information it evolved to use. Bones feel less compression with every step. Muscles work against less resistance during every movement. Blood settles differently inside vessels. Fluids distribute more evenly, instead of being pulled downward. None of these changes are dramatic on their own. If you experience them briefly, you might barely notice. But biology responds to patterns, not moments. Over time, reduced gravity becomes the baseline. The body recalibrates what it considers normal. A helpful way to think about this is to imagine turning down a dimmer switch. The light does not go out, it simply becomes weaker. Your eyes adjust. Soon, the dimmer light feels normal, even though less information is reaching you. Mars does the same thing to the body. Because gravity is lower, the mechanical signals that maintain tissues are weaker. The body interprets this as a reduced requirement for structural support, and so, slowly and quietly, it begins reducing that support. Importantly, this is not a temporary response. There is no point at which the body says, "This is enough loss." Maintenance continues until tissue strength matches the forces it experiences. On Earth, this balance point exists at full bone density and muscle mass, because gravity provides full loading. On Mars, the balance point is much lower. The body will eventually stop losing tissue, but only when what remains is sufficient for Martian gravity. That final state is not one designed for human activity as we know it. This is why partial gravity is not a safe middle ground. It is not almost enough. It is enough to keep the body functioning, but not enough to keep it fully intact. And because the environment never changes, the body never receives a signal to rebuild. It only receives confirmation to maintain less. This distinction matters deeply when we talk about living somewhere rather than visiting. Astronauts in orbit experience near-zero gravity. They lose bone and muscle rapidly, but when they return to Earth, gravity returns as well. The signal is restored. The body begins rebuilding what was lost. Mars offers no such recovery phase. The signal remains permanently reduced. This means that life on Mars would not involve a period of adaptation followed by stability. It would involve a slow movement toward a different physical equilibrium, a quieter one, a weaker one, and once reached, there would be no biological path back. Bones often feel solid and permanent. They give the impression of being fixed structures, like the frame of a building. But biologically, bones are alive. They are active tissues constantly being broken down and rebuilt. Cells remove old bone. Other cells lay down new material. This continuous process allows the skeleton to adapt to the forces placed upon it. The key signal guiding this process is mechanical stress. When you stand, walk, or lift objects on Earth, your bones experience small deformations. These deformations are not visible, but they are enough for bone cells to detect. Specialized cells sense strain and use it as information. If strain is present, the message is clear. This bone is needed. Maintain it. If strain is reduced, the message changes. This bone is overbuilt. Reduce it. This system evolved because bone is expensive to maintain. Minerals must be transported. Cells must be fed. unnecessary bone wastes energy that could be used elsewhere. On Earth, gravity ensures that bones are always loaded. Even standing still places force through the skeleton. The signal never disappears. On Mars, that signal weakens. Each step applies less force. Each movement produces less strain. Over time, bone cells receive fewer instructions to maintain density. Importantly, bone loss does not occur evenly. It concentrates in areas that normally bear the most weight: the hips, the lower spine, the upper portions of the leg bones. These are the bones that allow upright posture, walking, and lifting. They are also the bones most sensitive to changes in gravity. Studies of astronauts show how quickly this process begins. In microgravity, astronauts lose measurable bone density within months. The loss can reach 1 to 2% per month in critical areas. Mars gravity is not zero, but it is far below what is required to maintain Earth-level bone strength. While exact rates are difficult to measure, the direction is clear. Less gravity means less bone maintenance. Over years, this becomes a serious problem. Bone loss does not stabilize at a safe level. It continues until the remaining bone matches the mechanical demands of the environment. On Mars, that demand is low. The skeleton that remains would be lighter and weaker, more fragile, more prone to fracture. This fragility is not just about accidents. Bones do more than support the body. They protect organs. They provide attachment points for muscles. They shape how force moves through the body. As bones weaken, movement becomes less efficient. Muscles lose leverage. Balance becomes harder to maintain. And because bones house the marrow that produces blood cells, bone loss affects far more than structure. It reaches into the body's ability to carry oxygen, fight infection, and heal injuries. What begins as a quiet change in tissue density becomes a cascade of biological consequences. This is why bones are central to the question of living on Mars. They reveal how deeply the body depends on gravity not just to move, but to maintain itself. To understand why bone loss on Mars is so difficult to prevent, it helps to look closely at how bones maintain themselves on Earth. Inside bone tissue live specialized cells whose only role is to monitor force. They do not care about movement or intention. They care about strain. When a bone bends slightly under load, these cells detect the deformation. They respond by sending chemical signals that tell other cells to reinforce that area. New mineral is deposited. The structure is strengthened. This process is called mechanotransduction. It is how physical force becomes biological instruction. When force is present regularly, the system stays balanced. Bone is broken down and rebuilt at roughly equal rates. Strength is preserved. When force decreases, the signal weakens. The reinforcement message fades. Cells that remove bone continue their work, but cells that build bone receive fewer instructions to act. The result is gradual loss. Importantly, this process does not include a minimum safety threshold. There is no built-in rule that says stop here or the bone will become too fragile. The system only aims to match strength to experienced load. On Earth, this works because experienced load remains high enough to support normal human activity. On Mars, experienced load is permanently reduced. Exercise can help slow this process, but it cannot replicate the constant signal gravity provides. Even intense exercise occupies only a few hours of the day. The remaining time, the body exists under low mechanical stress. On Earth, gravity loads the skeleton even during rest. Standing, sitting, and even subtle posture adjustments provide continuous input. On Mars, those background signals are weaker. This difference matters more than it seems. Bone cells do not average forces over time in a forgiving way. They respond to repeated patterns. If most of the day provides insufficient strain, maintenance decreases. This is why astronauts exercise for hours each day and still lose bone mass. Their exercise sessions cannot compensate for the absence of constant loading. On Mars, the situation would be similar but permanent. Over years, bone architecture would change. Trabecular structures inside bones would thin. Cortical walls would become narrower. The internal geometry of bones would shift toward supporting lower forces. Once that geometry changes, it cannot simply be reversed without restoring full gravitational loading. Returning to Earth can slowly rebuild density, but it cannot perfectly reconstruct original architecture. Mars colonists would not return. Their bones would adapt to Mars and remain adapted to Mars. That adaptation would come at the cost of robustness, safety, and physical capacity. Understanding this mechanism helps explain why bone loss is not just an inconvenience or a health risk. It is a fundamental incompatibility between human skeletal biology and Martian gravity. One of the most important misunderstandings about bone loss in reduced gravity is the idea that it eventually levels off at a safe point, that the body might lose some bone, adapt, and then stabilize. Biology does not work that way. Bone loss continues until the remaining structure experiences enough mechanical load to justify its existence. The system seeks balance, not safety. On Earth, this balance happens at a level that supports walking, lifting, running, and recovering from falls. Gravity provides enough force that bones must remain strong to meet daily demands. On Mars, the balance point is lower. As bone density decreases, the remaining bone experiences slightly more strain relative to its strength. This slows the rate of loss, but it does not stop it until the structure matches Martian gravity. The final equilibrium is not a lightly weakened skeleton. It is a skeleton optimized for a low-force environment. That skeleton may be adequate for slow movement under reduced gravity, but it is not built to handle unexpected stress. A stumble, a fall, a sudden load during emergency work. On Earth, bones contain reserve strength. They are stronger than strictly necessary for routine activity. This reserve protects against accidents. On Mars, that reserve disappears. Fracture risk increases, not just from dramatic events, but from normal activity. And fractures heal more slowly in an environment where mechanical signals are weak. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Weaker bones lead to cautious movement. Cautious movement reduces mechanical loading even further. Reduced loading accelerates bone loss. Over time, mobility declines. Physical confidence fades. The range of safe activity narrows. This matters for more than individual health. A population living on Mars would depend on physical work to maintain habitats, repair systems, and respond to emergencies. Bone fragility limits what people can safely do. It limits how long they can work. It limits how quickly they can respond when something goes wrong. Importantly, bone loss does not occur in isolation. Bones are part of an integrated system. As skeletal strength decreases, muscles lose leverage. As muscles weaken, balance worsens. As balance worsens, fall risk increases. Each change amplifies the next. This is why bone loss on Mars is not a temporary medical issue. It is a long-term structural change that reshapes how the body functions. And because the environment never changes, the body never receives a signal to reverse course. Mars does not punish the skeleton quickly. It simply allows it to drift toward a state that no longer supports human life as we know it. Bones are often thought of as structural elements, but inside them lies another system that is just as essential to life. Bone marrow. Within the cavities of many bones, especially in the hips, spine, and upper legs, the body produces blood cells. Red blood cells that carry oxygen. White blood cells that fight infection. Platelets that allow blood to clot and wounds to heal. This process depends on healthy bone structure. As bones lose density, the internal spaces that support marrow shrink and change. The environment where blood cells are made becomes less efficient. Production slows. On Earth, this rarely becomes noticeable because bone density remains high. On Mars, it becomes part of the same gradual decline. Reduced bone density leads to reduced marrow volume. Reduced marrow volume leads to fewer blood cells. At first, the effects are subtle. Slight reductions in oxygen delivery, a slower immune response, longer recovery from minor injuries. Over time, these small changes accumulate. Lower red blood cell counts mean tissues receive less oxygen. Fatigue increases. Physical endurance decreases. Mental clarity can suffer. Lower white blood cell production weakens the immune system. Infections that would be minor on Earth become more serious. Recovery takes longer. The risk of complications rises. Platelets are affected as well. Clotting becomes less efficient. Bleeding lasts longer. Wounds heal more slowly. This matters greatly in a closed environment like a Mars habitat. People share air, water, and surfaces. Pathogens circulate more easily. A weakened immune system affects not just individuals but the entire group. Bone loss, therefore, is not just about fractures. It is about the body's capacity to sustain itself internally. As physical strength declines, so does resilience. The body becomes less capable of handling stress, injury, and illness. This creates another feedback loop. Weaker bones reduce activity. Reduced activity worsens muscle loss. Muscle loss further reduces bone loading. At the same time, blood production declines, slowing recovery from all of it. Each system reinforces the others. This interconnectedness is why partial fixes struggle. You cannot treat bone loss in isolation. You cannot fully protect muscles while ignoring marrow. You cannot maintain immune health without maintaining the structures that support it. Mars changes the background conditions that support all of these systems at once, and the body responds as a whole. Muscle tissue exists for one reason: to produce force. Unlike bone, which serves both structural and protective roles, muscle is purely functional. It contracts, relaxes, and consumes energy to create movement and stability. Because muscle is metabolically expensive, the body maintains it only when it is needed. This is a fundamental principle of human physiology. If a muscle is used regularly against resistance, it is preserved. If it is not, the body reduces it. On Earth, gravity provides resistance all day long. Simply standing upright requires muscle activity. Walking demands continuous effort from the legs, hips, and core. Even maintaining posture while sitting engages stabilizing muscles. This constant background work tells the body that muscle mass is necessary. On Mars, that background resistance is reduced. Every movement requires less force. Every step places less demand on muscles. The body senses this difference immediately. At first, the change is subtle. Movements feel easier. Fatigue is reduced. But biology interprets ease as excess capacity. If muscles are not being challenged, they are considered unnecessary. The body begins to break them down, redirecting energy and nutrients elsewhere. Astronaut studies show how quickly this process begins. In microgravity, certain muscle groups lose strength at rates approaching 5% per month. The most affected muscles are those that normally work against gravity: the calves, thighs, hips, back, and core. These are the muscles that allow upright movement and physical labour. Mars' gravity is higher than microgravity, but still far below Earth's. This means muscle loss would occur more slowly, but it would still occur continuously. Exercise can slow the process. Resistance training can signal muscles to stay, but exercise occupies only a fraction of the day. For the remaining hours, muscles experience low demand. The dominant signal remains reduction. Over years, muscle mass decreases, strength declines, endurance drops. This affects daily life in ways that go beyond comfort. Carrying equipment becomes harder. Climbing, lifting, and prolonged work become more tiring. Emergency responses demand strength that may no longer be available. As muscles weaken, coordination suffers, balance becomes less stable. The risk of falls increases, especially in a body already experiencing bone loss. This again feeds back into reduced activity. People move less to avoid injury. Less movement accelerates muscle loss. The body is not failing, it is following instructions. On Mars, those instructions quietly say the same thing every day. You do not need as much muscle. On Earth, exercise is something we choose to do, but beneath deliberate workouts, there is a deeper layer of physical effort that never stops. Gravity itself is the baseline workout. Every time you stand, gravity challenges your balance. Every step requires muscles to lift and control the body's weight. Every shift in posture asks bones and joints to manage force. This constant low-level effort does not feel like exercise because it has always been there. But biologically, it is essential. Gravity provides what might be called background training. It loads bones gently but continuously. It keeps muscles engaged without conscious effort. It maintains circulation patterns that challenge the heart just enough to preserve capacity. On Mars, this background training is weakened. The body still moves, but against less resistance. Standing is easier. Walking demands less effort. Posture requires fewer stabilizing corrections. From a comfort perspective, this feels pleasant. From a biological perspective, it removes the foundation upon which strength is maintained. Intentional exercise can replace some of this load, but not all of it. Exercise is episodic. Gravity is constant. Even the most disciplined training routine cannot replicate the continuous influence of Earth's gravity throughout the entire day and night. Muscles and bones respond to what happens most of the time, not what happens occasionally. This is why astronauts, despite exercising for hours each day, still lose bone and muscle. Their workouts are intense but brief. The rest of the day sends a different message. On Mars, that message never changes. Every moment of rest reinforces reduced demand. Every sleep cycle occurs under lower load. Every waking hour confirms the same baseline. Over years, the cumulative effect becomes decisive. The body does not remember that Earth gravity exists. It only responds to the gravity it experiences now. This is why gravity cannot be treated as one factor among many. It is the foundation on which the body's maintenance systems are built. Remove or weaken that foundation, and no amount of targeted effort can fully replace it. Mars does not remove gravity entirely. It removes enough of it to matter. It is natural to assume that exercise could solve the problem of reduced gravity. If muscles and bones weaken because they are not used enough, then using them more seems like a straightforward solution. On the surface, this makes sense. Resistance training strengthens muscles. Impact loading strengthens bones. On Earth, these methods are effective, but exercise works within a context. It adds to an already complete background of gravitational signals. It does not replace that background. On Mars, exercise would be asked to do something it was never meant to do. It would need to substitute for gravity itself. The challenge lies in time. Even an intense workout lasts only a few hours. The remaining 20 or more hours of the day are spent under reduced load. During that time, the body receives the dominant signal: less force, less resistance, less need. Biological systems respond to the most frequent input, not the strongest occasional one. A brief period of high strain cannot override a full day of low strain. This is why astronauts on the International Space Station exercise so extensively and still lose bone and muscle. Their equipment is sophisticated, their training is carefully designed. And yet, the losses continue. Mars gravity would slow this process, but it would not stop it. There is also the issue of sustainability. Exercise routines require motivation, time, and functioning equipment. In a permanent settlement, not everyone will train perfectly every day. People get sick, equipment breaks. Other priorities compete for time. Over years and decades, compliance inevitably declines. Even small lapses matter when the environment itself provides no safety net. Exercise also cannot fully replicate how gravity loads the body. Gravity applies force in all positions. It loads joints during subtle movements. It affects fluid distribution continuously. Machines can simulate some forces, but not all of them, and not all the time. This is why gravity is not just another variable that can be engineered away. It is the constant background condition that exercise assumes will always exist. Without it, exercise becomes a partial and fragile substitute. Mars would require perfect discipline, perfect equipment, and perfect consistency across an entire population for an entire lifetime. Biology does not rely on perfection. It relies on stable environments. Mars does not provide one. The human heart did not evolve in isolation. It evolved inside a body that always lived under Earth's gravity. Every time you stand upright, gravity pulls blood toward your feet. To keep blood flowing to the brain, the heart must pump upward against that pull. At the same time, veins and valves prevent blood from pooling in the lower body. This constant challenge shapes the heart's structure. The left ventricle, the main pumping chamber, develops the strength and geometry needed to move blood through the entire body against gravity. Blood vessels maintain tone and elasticity because they must manage pressure differences from head to toe. The entire cardiovascular system calibrates itself around one assumption: gravity is always there. On Mars, that assumption is violated. With weaker gravity, blood no longer pools as strongly in the lower body. More blood shifts toward the chest and head. The heart experiences less resistance when pumping upward. The body interprets this change as reduced demand. In response, it adjusts. The heart does not remain overbuilt. Like muscles and bones, it adapts to what it senses. If less force is required, the heart remodels itself to match that requirement. This remodeling is subtle. The heart becomes slightly smaller. Its walls change shape. Its ability to generate high pressure gradually declines. In the short term, this adaptation feels efficient. The heart is doing exactly what it needs to do, no more, no less. But efficiency comes with a cost. A heart optimized for reduced gravity has less reserve capacity. It can handle routine activity, but it struggles with sudden demands. Physical labor, emergency response, illness. Astronauts returning from space experience this directly. When they stand up on Earth, their hearts and blood vessels struggle to manage full gravity again. Blood pools in the legs, blood pressure drops, dizziness and fainting occur. Recovery takes weeks or months, even after relatively short missions. Mars offers no recovery phase. A heart that adapts to Martian gravity would remain adapted. It would become a Martian heart. This might seem acceptable if life on Mars were always gentle and predictable, but real environments are not. Emergencies require exertion. Repairs require strength. Illness requires cardiovascular reserve. A system calibrated for minimal demand has little margin for error. Over years, this loss of reserve becomes limiting. The heart can keep the body alive under calm conditions, but it cannot reliably support the stresses that long-term survival in a harsh environment demands. This is another example of a quiet biological truth. The heart does not fail dramatically on Mars. It simply becomes less capable step by step as it follows the signals it receives. As the heart adapts to reduced gravity, the changes extend beyond its shape. The entire circulation system recalibrates. On Earth, blood pressure must overcome gravity to supply the brain. Veins rely on muscle contractions and valves to push blood upward. Blood vessels maintain thickness and tone to handle pressure differences along the body's length. In lower gravity, these demands ease. Blood distributes more evenly through the body. The upward struggle is reduced. The cardiovascular system interprets this as excess capacity. In response, blood volume decreases. The kidneys sense what appears to be fluid overload and remove liquid from the bloodstream. Plasma volume drops. The total amount of circulating blood declines. This is not a malfunction. It is the body adjusting to a new signal. But reduced blood volume limits performance. With less blood, the heart can deliver less oxygen during exertion. The maximum output of the cardiovascular system decreases. Endurance falls. At the same time, Blood vessels adapt to lower pressure. Their walls become thinner. Elasticity changes. These adaptations are efficient for a low-demand environment, but fragile when demand increases. Astronauts experience these changes after relatively short periods in microgravity. When they return to Earth, their bodies struggle to cope with full gravity. Blood pressure drops when standing. The brain briefly receives less oxygen. Mars colonists would never return to Earth gravity. Their cardiovascular systems would remain permanently adapted to lower demand. This adaptation would not simply limit travel back to Earth, it would limit life on Mars itself. Tasks that require sustained effort would become more taxing. Recovery from illness or injury would be slower. The margin for error during emergencies would shrink. In a setting where technology must be maintained continuously, reduced cardiovascular capacity becomes a serious vulnerability. The heart and blood vessels are not designed to be pushed beyond their calibrated range. Once adapted downward, their ability to scale back up is limited without a change in environment. Mars would never provide that change. This is why cardiovascular adaptation is not a temporary inconvenience. It is a permanent shift in capacity. A body optimized for low gravity becomes less capable of handling stress. And stress, in one form or another, is unavoidable. Gravity does more than shape muscles and bones. It also governs how fluids move inside the body. On Earth, gravity pulls blood and other fluids downward. This creates predictable pressure differences between the head and the feet. The body has evolved precise mechanisms to manage these differences. When you stand, blood tends to pool in the lower body. Sensors in blood vessels detect this shift. The heart beats slightly faster. Blood vessels constrict. Valves in veins assist the return flow upward. All of this happens automatically. In reduced gravity, these signals change. Blood and other fluids no longer settle downward as strongly. Instead, they redistribute toward the chest and head. The body interprets this as having too much fluid in the upper body. In response, it acts to correct what it perceives as an imbalance. The kidneys increase urine production. Overall fluid volume decreases. Blood plasma levels drop. This adjustment may feel harmless at first, but over time it has consequences. Lower blood volume means less oxygen delivery during exertion. It also reduces the brain's buffer against drops in blood pressure. Small changes that would be insignificant on Earth become noticeable. At the same time, fluid shifts affect the brain directly. Cerebrospinal fluid, the liquid that cushions and protects the brain, moves differently when gravity is reduced. Pressure around the brain increases slightly. This pressure change does not cause immediate pain or injury. Instead, it produces subtle, long-term effects. Studies of astronauts show changes in vision and in the shape of the eye. The back of the eye flattens slightly. The optic nerve can swell. Some changes reverse after return to Earth. Some do not. On Mars, there would be no return. Chronic fluid redistribution would persist for years. The brain would exist under a different pressure regime than it evolved for. Small distortions would accumulate slowly. Vision is especially sensitive to these changes. Clear sight depends on precise pressure balance inside the eye. Even slight shifts can reduce visual acuity. In a technologically complex environment, vision matters. Reading instruments, repairing equipment, monitoring systems. As vision degrades gradually across a population, the ability to maintain infrastructure declines with it. This is another example of how reduced gravity produces effects that are not dramatic but cumulative. The body adjusts to altered fluid signals. Those adjustments reduce reserve. Reduced reserve limits resilience. Mars does not create a single point of failure. It introduces many small stresses that compound over time. Vision feels effortless when it works well. We rarely think about the delicate balance that allows us to see clearly. The eye is a pressure-sensitive organ. Its shape depends on subtle forces acting from inside and outside. Even small persistent changes can alter how light focuses on the retina. On Earth, gravity helps regulate how fluids distribute around the brain and eyes. Cerebrospinal fluid flows in predictable patterns. Pressure remains within a narrow, stable range. In reduced gravity, that balance shifts. Fluid that would normally drain downward remains closer to the head. Pressure around the optic nerve increases slightly. Over time, this pressure can flatten the back of the eye and stress the optic nerve. Astronauts who spend months in microgravity often experience changes in vision. Some develop blurred sight, some require glasses for the first time, others develop small blind spots. These changes are grouped under a condition known as spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. NASA considers it one of the most significant risks of long-duration space missions. Mars gravity would reduce the severity of these effects compared to microgravity, but it would not eliminate them. The key factor is duration. Short exposures allow partial recovery. Long, continuous exposure allows changes to accumulate. On Mars, altered fluid distribution would persist year after year. The body would not receive the gravitational signals needed to fully restore normal pressure balance. Vision changes would likely progress slowly. At first, they might be barely noticeable. Then reading would become more tiring. Fine detail would become harder to resolve. Across a population, these changes matter. A colony depends on people being able to see clearly. Precision work requires sharp vision. Maintenance tasks rely on accurate perception. As visual acuity declines, error rates increase. Small mistakes compound. System reliability suffers. This is not about blindness. It is about gradual degradation. Mars does not take vision away suddenly. It slowly erodes the margin that allows vision to remain sharp under all conditions. And because the environment never changes, there is no natural path to recovery. Inside the inner ear are small structures that rarely receive attention, yet they quietly inform the brain about one of the most fundamental aspects of reality. Which way is down? The vestibular system contains sensors that detect gravity and acceleration. Tiny crystals shift in response to force, bending microscopic hair cells. These movements generate signals that tell the brain how the head is oriented. On Earth, this system develops and calibrates itself under a constant gravitational pull. From early childhood onward, the brain learns to interpret vestibular signals as reliable information. Balance, coordination, and spatial awareness all depend on this calibration. In reduced gravity, the signals change. The crystals move differently. The forces acting on them are weaker. The information reaching the brain no longer matches the patterns it evolved to expect. At first, the brain struggles. Astronauts often experience disorientation and motion sickness when gravity changes. Over time, the brain adapts, not by fixing the signal, but by learning to rely on it less. It suppresses vestibular input and leans more heavily on vision and proprioception. This strategy works, but it is a compromise. On Mars, this compromise would become permanent. The vestibular system would provide a weaker reference signal. The brain would adapt to that weakened input as normal. Balance would be maintained, but with reduced precision. This matters more than it sounds. The vestibular system integrates with vision to stabilize images during movement. It integrates with motor planning to coordinate motion. It contributes to spatial reasoning and orientation. When vestibular input is altered, these systems are subtly affected. People might move more cautiously. Coordination might be slightly less precise. Spatial tasks might require more attention. Individually, these changes may seem minor. Collectively, they shape how effectively people can work in a demanding environment. For adults who arrive from Earth, adaptation would be partial and incomplete. For children born on Mars, the situation would be different. Their vestibular systems would develop from the beginning under reduced gravity. Their brains would learn that this weakened signal is normal. They would have no reference for Earth gravity. This would not make them dysfunctional, but it would make them different. Their brains would be calibrated to a world that provides less directional information. How this would affect higher-level cognition over time remains uncertain. What is clear is that gravity is not just a force acting on the body. It is a reference signal that the brain uses to organize experience. Mars alters that signal. When the brain encounters signals it cannot interpret reliably, it does not stop functioning. It adapts. But adaptation is not always an improvement. Sometimes it is a workaround. In altered gravity, the brain receives vestibular information that no longer matches its expectations. The signals are weaker, the timing is different, the patterns feel inconsistent. Rather than recalibrating the system perfectly, the brain often chooses another strategy. It reduces the weight it gives to vestibular input. Instead, it leans more heavily on vision, touch, and muscle feedback to maintain orientation and balance. This allows basic function to continue, but it comes at a cost. Ignoring a sensory channel reduces redundancy. On Earth, balance and coordination are supported by multiple overlapping systems. If one signal is noisy, others can compensate. This redundancy makes movement stable and resilient. On Mars, that redundancy weakens. With vestibular input downplayed, vision becomes more critical. If visibility is poor, balance suffers. If attention is divided, coordination declines. This matters in environments where people must work carefully and precisely. Repair tasks, navigation through confined spaces, responding quickly to unexpected events. The brain's adaptive strategy keeps people functioning, but with narrower margins. Over time, this altered balance between sensory systems becomes the new normal. The brain rewires itself to depend less on gravity-based signals. For adults, this represents a shift away from Earth-calibrated processing. For children born on Mars, it represents their baseline. Their brains would develop with reduced reliance on vestibular input from the start. The architecture of neural connections would reflect that reality. What does that mean for cognition? The vestibular system is more than a balance organ. It contributes to spatial memory, navigation, and the brain's internal map of the world. When its input is reduced or altered, these cognitive functions can change subtly, not dramatically, not catastrophically, but persistently. Small increases in mental effort, slightly slower processing of spatial information, greater reliance on conscious attention for tasks that are automatic on Earth. In isolation, these effects may seem manageable, but Mars does not introduce a single challenge. It introduces many small ones at once. Each adaptation the brain makes to cope with reduced gravity reduces flexibility elsewhere. Each workaround narrows the range of conditions under which performance remains optimal. This is how biological systems respond to environments they were not designed for. Not with collapse, but with gradual specialization. The brain does not fail on Mars. It becomes tuned to a different, more limited set of signals. Around Earth exists an invisible structure that quietly protects every living thing on the surface, a magnetic field generated deep within the planet's core. This field deflects charged particles arriving from space. It bends their paths, guiding many of them away from the planet entirely. Those that do reach Earth are funneled toward the poles or absorbed high in the atmosphere. Because this protection is constant, we rarely think about it. Mars does not have this shield. Billions of years ago, Mars lost the internal motion that generated a global magnetic field. Its core cooled. The dynamo shut down. What remains today are only faint localized magnetic patches locked into ancient rocks. For biology, this absence matters. Without a global magnetic field, high-energy particles from the Sun and from deep space reach the Martian surface far more easily. Mars stands exposed to a steady rain of radiation that Earth largely deflects. This radiation does not arrive in dramatic flashes. It arrives quietly, continuously. Some particles pass through the body without interaction. Others collide with atoms inside cells, transferring energy in the process. That energy can disrupt molecular structures. On Earth, this happens at low rates. DNA repair systems evolve to manage the damage. Errors are corrected. Stability is preserved. On Mars, the rate of damage increases. The body responds by working harder to repair DNA. Repair enzymes activate more often. Cellular maintenance systems operate under greater strain. For a while, this works, but repair systems are not perfect. They trade speed for accuracy when demand rises. Mistakes become more likely. This is not a sudden failure. It is a gradual shift in balance. Damage begins to accumulate slightly faster than it can be corrected. Cells survive, but their genetic instructions slowly drift. This process affects all tissues, but its most important effects appear in cells that divide and reproduce. Mars's lack of magnetic protection is therefore not just a surface hazard, it is a deep biological stressor. It increases the background level of uncertainty in every cell's instructions, and because this exposure is constant, there is no recovery phase. The environment never tells the body that it is safe to relax its defenses. Mars quietly demands more from biology than biology evolved to give. Mars does have an atmosphere, but it is only a trace of what surrounds Earth. Its surface pressure is less than 1% of Earth's. This thin layer of gas offers almost no protection from incoming radiation. On Earth, the atmosphere acts like a vast shield. High-energy particles collide with air molecules high above the surface and lose energy long before reaching living tissue. By the time radiation reaches the ground, much of its danger has been softened. Mars lacks this buffer. Particles that would be absorbed or scattered on Earth reach the Martian surface largely unchanged. They pass through habitats, equipment, and bodies with ease. Measurements taken by robotic instruments show how large this difference is. Radiation levels on the Martian surface are many times higher than what humans experience naturally on Earth. In practical terms, a person on Mars would receive in days what the body normally absorbs over an entire year at home. The body responds as it always does. DNA repair systems activate, damaged molecules are replaced, cells continue functioning, but higher exposure changes the statistics. Every repair process has a small chance of error. As the number of repairs increases, so does the number of mistakes. These mistakes accumulate slowly, cell by cell. Most of the time, this causes no immediate problem. Cells can tolerate a certain amount of genetic variation. Tissues continue working. The deeper concern is time. Radiation exposure on Mars is not episodic. It does not arrive only during rare storms. It is part of the background, present every day, year after year. There is no moment when the body can relax its vigilance, no period when repair systems can catch up fully. Over decades, this constant pressure shifts biology away from stability. Cells still survive, but their internal instructions become less precise. For individuals, this raises the risk of cancer and degenerative disease. For populations, it raises an even quieter concern: the integrity of genetic information across generations. This is where radiation stops being a medical issue and becomes a question of biological sustainability. Mars's thin atmosphere does not kill quickly. It increases the long-term cost of staying alive. Radiation is often imagined as something dramatic, a flash, a burn, an immediate injury. But most radiation damage does not feel like anything at all. High-energy particles pass through the body silently. They do not trigger pain receptors. They do not announce their presence. Cells continue functioning as if nothing happened. The damage occurs at a scale far below awareness. When radiation interacts with tissue, it transfers energy to individual atoms and molecules. Chemical bonds break, electrons are displaced, DNA strands are altered. The body notices only indirectly. Repair enzymes move in to fix the damage. Broken strands are rejoined, altered bases are replaced. Most of the time, the repair succeeds. Because this process is quiet and efficient, radiation feels abstract. It does not demand attention in the moment. This is what makes it dangerous over long periods. On Earth, background radiation is low enough that repair systems stay ahead of the damage. Errors remain rare. Genetic information stays stable across a lifetime. On Mars, the balance shifts. Damage happens more often. Repair systems work continuously. Fatigue does not apply to enzymes, but statistical limits do. As the number of repair events increases, so does the number of small mistakes. Most mistakes are harmless. Some are not. The effects do not appear immediately. They emerge slowly, sometimes years later. A cell may function normally until one day it does not. A tissue may appear healthy until accumulated damage crosses a threshold. Because radiation damage is invisible, it does not guide behavior naturally. People cannot sense when exposure is increasing. They cannot intuitively avoid it. Protection must be deliberate and constant, and even then, it is never complete. This is why radiation is not best understood as an acute threat. It is a background pressure that shapes biology over time. Mars does not confront the body with a single moment of danger. It asks the body to operate indefinitely under conditions that quietly increase error rates. And biology, precise as it is, has limits to how much error it can absorb. Every cell in your body carries a copy of the same genetic instructions, 3 billion chemical letters arranged in a precise sequence telling each cell how to function, divide, and repair itself. This information is not static. It is constantly under stress. Even on Earth, DNA is damaged thousands of times each day in every cell. Normal metabolism produces reactive molecules. Background radiation causes occasional breaks. Heat and chemical reactions introduce small errors. Life persists because cells are exceptionally good at fixing these problems. Specialized enzymes patrol DNA continuously. They recognize mismatched bases. They cut out damaged sections. They rebuild the correct sequence using the intact strand as a template. Under Earth's conditions, this system works remarkably well. Errors occur, but slowly enough that the overall integrity of the genome is preserved. Mars changes the workload. Higher radiation means more frequent damage, more breaks, more chemical alterations, more repair events. The repair machinery speeds up to keep pace. But speed comes at a cost. Some types of damage are easy to fix. Single-strand breaks can be repaired accurately. The intact strand provides clear guidance. Other types are harder. When both strands of DNA break close together, repair becomes uncertain. Cells must reconnect fragments without a perfect template. In these cases, mistakes are more likely. High-energy radiation increases the frequency of these complex breaks. On Mars, repair systems would face a higher proportion of difficult repairs. The probability of small errors would rise. Most of these errors would have no immediate effect. They might occur in non-coding regions. They might alter genes in ways that do not change function. But some would matter. A gene might produce a slightly altered protein. A regulatory sequence might behave differently. A cell might begin dividing more often than it should. Over time, the number of altered cells increases. For an individual, this raises the risk of cancer and degenerative disease. For a population, it raises a deeper concern. Genetic information is not only used within one body, it is passed on. Errors that occur in reproductive cells become part of the next generation starting point. Mars does not overwhelm DNA repair instantly. It shifts the balance just enough that long-term stability becomes uncertain. This is the difference between living in an environment that biology expects and one that quietly pushes it beyond its comfort zone. It is important to pause here and notice something subtle. Much of what we have discussed so far does not make Mars sound immediately lethal, and that is intentional. Adult humans are remarkably resilient. A healthy adult who grew up on Earth carries a body that was fully formed under Earth's gravity, pressure, and radiation protection. Bones reached their peak density. Organs developed along stable pathways. The brain calibrated itself using consistent signals. When such a person travels to Mars, they do not arrive as a blank slate. They arrive with completed biological structure. This matters. Many of the changes caused by reduced gravity and increased radiation take time. Bone loss is gradual. Muscle atrophy unfolds over months and years. Cardiovascular remodeling is slow. Radiation damage accumulates quietly. For an adult, this means something important. They can endure, they can work, they can think clearly, they can maintain complex systems. They can live for years in an environment that is not ideal for their biology. This is why short-term missions are feasible. Astronauts spend months in orbit. They experience measurable biological changes, and when they return to Earth, much of that damage slowly reverses. The key word is return. Earth restores the missing signals, gravity loads bones again, fluid redistributes, repair systems relax, the body rebuilds. Mars removes that option. An adult on Mars would still function. They might even feel capable for a long time, but each year would quietly shift their biology further away from its Earth-optimized state. Strength would decline, recovery would slow, reserve capacity would shrink. These changes would not feel dramatic day to day. They would feel like gradual aging. The danger lies in mistaking endurance for sustainability. A person can tolerate biological stress for a time. A population must maintain itself across decades and generations. Mars does not prevent adult survival. It undermines long-term biological stability. Understanding this distinction is crucial. The question is not whether humans can survive on Mars for a year or even 10 years. The question is whether human biology can sustain itself indefinitely, without access to Earth's restorative environment. So far, everything we have examined points to the same answer. Adults can endure Mars. Humanity cannot live there. So far, everything we have discussed applies mainly to adults who developed on Earth. They arrive on Mars with bodies already shaped under the right conditions. That gives them a kind of biological buffer. They can lose some bone, some muscle, some cardiovascular capacity and still function, for a time. Reproduction changes the question completely. Biology is most vulnerable not when it is maintaining an existing body, but when it is building a new one. From the first division of a fertilized cell, development depends on precise physical signals. Cells do not simply follow genetic instructions in isolation. They respond to forces, pressures, fluid flows, and orientations in their environment. On Earth, those signals have always been the same. Gravity pulls with a constant strength. Fluids settle in predictable ways. Mechanical forces guide how tissues form and where organs position themselves. These conditions were never optional during human evolution. They were always present. On Mars, they are not. A developing embryo would experience only a fraction of the gravitational input that human development assumes. Fluids would distribute differently. Mechanical stresses that guide bone formation, heart development, and neural organization would be weaker or altered. These are not cosmetic differences. They affect how structures form from the beginning. Development does not include a retry mechanism. Organs are shaped once. Bones follow a developmental path that cannot be replayed later under better conditions. If early signals are incomplete or distorted, later stages inherit those distortions. This is why reproduction is not just a continuation of adult survival. It is a reset point. Each generation begins again, and each beginning depends on environmental inputs that Mars cannot fully provide. Even small deviations early in development can compound over time. A slight alteration in bone formation affects posture. Posture affects movement. Movement affects muscle loading. Muscle loading affects circulation. Circulation affects organ growth. Each system influences the next. An adult body can tolerate gradual loss because it starts from a complete structure. A developing body does not have that luxury. It builds itself according to the signals it receives. If those signals are reduced or mismatched, the resulting body is different from the start. This is not about adaptation in a positive sense. it is about development under constrained conditions, the result is not a weaker version of an Earth-developed human, but a differently formed organism, and that difference carries forward. When individuals who developed under altered conditions reproduce, their children develop inside bodies that are themselves already altered. The environment of development becomes even more removed from Earth's baseline. This is how biological degradation becomes generational rather than individual. Mars does not simply stress one lifetime, it shifts the starting point of the next. Reproduction does not only involve building a body, it also involves copying information. Each time a child is conceived, genetic instructions are passed forward, carrying everything that was written accurately, and everything that was altered along the way. On Earth, this process is remarkably stable. The natural background level of radiation is low enough that DNA repair systems keep mutation rates within a narrow range. Most changes are harmless. Harmful ones appear slowly enough that natural selection can remove them over time. Across generations, the overall integrity of the human genome is preserved. Mars changes that balance. Higher radiation exposure increases the number of DNA damage events in reproductive cells. Eggs and sperm are not protected from this environment. When damage occurs in these cells and is repaired imperfectly, the resulting mutation becomes part of the next generation's starting point. This is not a dramatic event. It does not produce monsters or immediate failure. It produces small changes, slight alterations in proteins, subtle differences in regulation. Most are neutral, some are not. The problem is accumulation. Each generation inherits the mutations of the previous one and adds new ones of its own. On Earth, the rate of new harmful mutations is low enough that this accumulation stays manageable. On Mars, the rate would be higher. Over several generations, the genetic load increases. Fertility declines. Developmental errors become more common. The probability of miscarriage rises. Childhood illness becomes harder to survive. These effects do not appear all at once. They unfold gradually, almost invisibly. What makes this process especially difficult is that it cannot be reversed. Once a mutation enters the population, it remains unless it is actively removed by selection. In a small, isolated colony, that removal is inefficient. Harmful variants persist simply because there are too few individuals for natural filtering to work effectively. This means that even if adult colonists manage to maintain their own health, their descendants would begin life carrying a heavier biological burden. Each generation would start slightly further from the conditions that human biology evolved to tolerate. Mars does not need to cause catastrophic damage to ensure failure. It only needs to tilt the balance between damage and repair. Over enough generations, that tilt becomes decisive. To see why permanent settlement fails, we have to focus on the most vulnerable stage of human life: development from conception through childhood. This is the period when biology is least flexible and most dependent on stable environmental signals. Human embryos are not simply genetic programs unfolding on their own. Development is guided by continuous interaction with physical forces. Gravity shapes how fluids move. Mechanical stress influences how bones and muscles form. Blood flow patterns help sculpt the heart and blood vessels. Neural tissue organizes itself in response to these cues. On Earth, these signals are consistent. On Mars, they are reduced. From the earliest stages, cell divisions would occur under altered mechanical conditions. Fluids would not settle as they do on Earth. As tissues grow and differentiate, the forces guiding their shape would be weaker or misdirected. These differences appear small in isolation, but development magnifies them. Bone formation is a clear example. Human bones do not form as solid structures from the start. They begin as cartilage templates that are gradually reshaped into mineralized bone. This process depends on mechanical loading. Without sufficient load, bones do not just become less dense, they form with different geometry. Once that geometry is established, it cannot be corrected later. The The same principle applies to the cardiovascular system. The developing heart responds to blood flow patterns. Gravity influences those patterns by shaping how blood distributes within the body. Reduced gravity alters the signals that guide heart structure. The result is a heart calibrated for a different environment with limited reserve. Neural development is even more sensitive. The brain builds itself through precisely timed migrations and connections. The vestibular system, which directly senses gravity, plays a central role in organizing spatial processing. If gravity is reduced, the reference signal guiding this organization is altered. The brain still develops, but along a different trajectory. Immune development is also affected. Immune cells mature through physical interactions in bone marrow and lymphoid tissues. Changes in mechanical environment and circulation alter how these cells are selected and trained. The result is a system that functions, but with reduced resilience. A child born on Mars would not be a slightly weaker Earth child. Their body would be structured differently from the beginning. Many of these differences would not be obvious at birth. They would become apparent over time as growth, movement, learning, and resistance to illness revealed the limits of development under reduced gravity and elevated radiation. This is why the question of Mars is not about whether humans can adapt. It is about whether human development can proceed normally. Everything we know from biology suggests it cannot. When these biological limits become clear, it is natural to look toward technology for answers. Humans have solved many problems by building tools that extend what our bodies can do. It feels reasonable to assume that the same approach could work on Mars. Some solutions do help, but only partially. Living underground can reduce radiation exposure. Thick layers of soil absorb many incoming particles, especially those from solar storms. This lowers risk, but it does not remove it. High-energy cosmic radiation still penetrates, and secondary radiation is produced when particles collide with shielding material. Exposure decreases, but it never reaches Earth normal levels. Exercise devices can slow muscle and bone loss. Artificial resistance can remind tissues that force still matters, but exercise is intermittent and gravity is constant. Machines cannot reproduce the continuous, low-level loading that Earth provides all day and all night. Over decades, small deficits accumulate. Artificial gravity has also been proposed. Rotating habitats could simulate Earth-like forces. In principle, this could protect adult bodies. In practice, it introduces new problems. Structures large enough to avoid disorienting gravity gradients would be enormous. Maintaining them on Mars would demand resources and reliability far beyond what an early settlement could sustain. More importantly, artificial gravity does not solve development at a population scale. Children would need consistent Earth-level gravity throughout pregnancy, infancy, childhood, and adolescence. That would require families to live almost entirely inside rotating structures for decades. The social, logistical, and psychological cost of such confinement would be immense. Radiation-protective drugs are sometimes suggested. These compounds can reduce certain types of cellular damage. They do not prevent all DNA breaks, especially those caused by high-energy particles. Reducing damage is not the same as eliminating it. Any remaining excess damage still accumulates across generations. Genetic engineering is the most radical proposal. The idea is to modify humans so they can tolerate Mars. This would require rewriting the fundamental processes of development, repair, and reproduction. We do not understand these systems well enough to redesign them safely. And even if we did, the result would no longer be human biology as we know it. Each technological solution addresses a symptom, not the cause. Mars lacks the environmental conditions human biology assumes. Technology can compensate temporarily, but it must work perfectly, continuously, and forever. Biology does not tolerate small, persistent gaps. This is the core limitation. Technology can help individuals survive for a time. It cannot transform Mars into an environment where human life naturally sustains itself. At this point, a quiet distinction becomes important. Exploration and settlement are not the same thing. Humans have explored many environments on Earth that cannot support permanent life. Deep oceans, polar ice, high-altitude mountains. In each case, technology allows temporary presence, not biological sustainability. Mars belongs in this category. A place can be scientifically valuable without being biologically compatible. Mars holds records of planetary history, climate change, and possibly ancient life. Studying it helps us understand how worlds evolve and why Earth remained habitable while Mars did not. Robotic exploration already demonstrates this clearly. Machines can operate under conditions that human bodies cannot tolerate. They do not require gravity for maintenance. They do not suffer DNA damage. They do not age or reproduce. Humans bring something different: judgment, flexibility, the ability to notice unexpected patterns and ask new questions in real time. For these reasons, temporary human missions to Mars make sense. Carefully planned expeditions, limited durations, guaranteed return to Earth. In this model, Mars is not a home. It is a field site. The difference matters because it aligns ambition with biology. It respects what human bodies can endure and what they cannot sustain indefinitely. Permanent settlement, by contrast, assumes that endurance equals stability. It assumes that because adults can function for years, populations can persist for generations. Biology does not support that assumption. A sustainable population must do more than survive. It must reproduce successfully. It must develop healthy children. It must maintain physical and cognitive capacity across time. Mars does not provide the conditions required for that process. Recognizing this does not diminish human aspiration, it refines it. Exploration guided by biological reality is more likely to succeed than dreams built on ignoring constraints. Mars can teach us much. It simply cannot raise us. When we talk about limits, it is easy to hear disappointment in the word. But in science, limits are not judgments, they are descriptions. They tell us where a process works and where it does not. Human biology has limits not because it is weak, but because it is precise. It operates within narrow ranges that allow extraordinary stability. Bones maintain strength. Organs coordinate efficiently. Cells divide, repair, and communicate with remarkable reliability. This precision depends on consistent environmental inputs. Mars does not violate those inputs violently. It simply fails to provide enough of them. Gravity is lower, radiation is higher, pressure is thinner. None of these differences are dramatic in isolation, but together they shift biology out of its stable zone. Recognizing this is not pessimism. It is understanding. When we accept biological constraints, we make better decisions about how and where to explore. We stop trying to force life into environments that quietly erode it. We focus instead on places where life can unfold without constant correction. Earth remains one of those places, not because it is perfect, but because it matches us. The relationship between planet and organism is reciprocal. Earth shaped us, and we are shaped to remain here. Mars offers insight, not refuge. It shows us what happens when a planet loses the conditions that support complex life. In that sense, Mars is not a failure story. It is a lesson. Understanding that lesson allows curiosity to continue without illusion. We can study Mars deeply. We can visit it carefully. We can learn from it without asking it to become something it is not. Limits, when understood clearly, create calm. They replace struggle with clarity, and clarity is what allows exploration to proceed wisely, without exhausting the life that does the exploring. Life on Earth often feels ordinary because it is familiar. Gravity pulls with the same strength every moment. The atmosphere presses gently and evenly against the body. Radiation is filtered long before it reaches living tissue. These conditions are so stable that we rarely notice them. But stability is not the absence of activity. It is the quiet presence of balance. Every biological process in the human body assumes that these background conditions will not change. Cells divide knowing the chemical environment will remain predictable. Organs develop knowing mechanical forces will guide their shape. Repair systems operate knowing damage rates will stay within manageable limits. This stability is not guaranteed on most planets. It is the result of Earth's long geological and magnetic history. A planet that retained its atmosphere, a core that continued generating a magnetic field, a mass large enough to hold gravity steady. Because this stability never calls attention to itself, it is easy to underestimate its importance. Only when it is missing do we see how deeply it matters. Mars shows us that difference clearly, not through catastrophe, but through contrast. It reveals how much of life depends on conditions that never announce themselves. When people imagine humans adapting to Mars, they often picture evolution stepping in to solve the problem. Over time, they assume biology would adjust. Evolution does adapt organisms to environments, but it operates on timescales that are often misunderstood. Significant biological adaptation requires thousands to millions of years. It requires large populations, high genetic diversity, and many generations of selection. Even then, adaptation is not guaranteed. It depends on whether suitable solutions exist within the limits of biology. Mars presents multiple simultaneous challenges: reduced gravity, increased radiation, thin atmosphere, and altered developmental signals. Adapting to one of these might be possible in theory. Adapting to all of them at once is far more uncertain. More importantly, evolution does not preserve comfort or intelligence or culture. It preserves reproduction. Any traits that allowed survival on Mars might come at the cost of what we currently recognize as human health or capacity, and the process would not be gentle. Many individuals would fail to develop or reproduce along the way. Evolution does not protect populations from suffering. Relying on evolution to make Mars habitable is not a plan. It is a gamble played over timescales longer than civilizations last. Human planning operates on short horizons, years, decades, occasionally centuries. Biology and planetary change operate on much longer ones. Terraforming Mars, altering its atmosphere or restoring its magnetic field would require timescales measured in tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Even optimistic projections place such changes far beyond any current human institution's ability to maintain continuity. Human bodies, by contrast, must function well within a single lifetime. Children must develop properly within years. Adults must remain healthy across decades. Populations must remain stable from one generation to the next. These timelines do not align. Mars may change very slowly over geological time, but humans cannot wait for that change. Biology demands stability now, not eventually. This mismatch is fundamental. It means that Mars cannot gradually become a home while humans slowly adapt. One or the other would have to change far faster than nature allows. Understanding this mismatch brings clarity. It shows that the question is not whether Mars could someday be habitable, but whether it is compatible with human life within meaningful time frames. Everything we know suggests it is not. When we look at Mars through a biological lens, another comparison becomes clear. Machines and living bodies respond to environments in fundamentally different ways. A robot does not depend on gravity to maintain its structure. It does not suffer bone loss, muscle atrophy, or fluid shifts. Radiation does not damage its instructions in the same way it damages DNA. When components degrade, they are replaced, not inherited. This makes Mars an environment where machines can thrive in ways humans cannot. Rovers and landers operate continuously, enduring cold, radiation, and isolation without biological cost. They do not need to reproduce. They do not need to develop. They do not need generational stability. Humans bring qualities machines still lack: intuition, contextual understanding, creativity, and flexible problem solving. These qualities are valuable for exploration, especially in complex or unexpected situations, but they do not require permanent presence. They require careful, time-limited missions that respect biological limits. Understanding this distinction helps align effort with reality. Mars does not need to become a second Earth to be scientifically meaningful. It can be studied, mapped, and understood through a partnership between human insight and robotic endurance. Trying to replace biology with machinery is unnecessary. Trying to force biology to behave like machinery is impossible. Accepting biological limits does not reduce human curiosity. It sharpens it. When we stop asking Mars to be a home, we can ask better questions about what it actually is. How did it lose its atmosphere? Why did its magnetic field fade? What does its history tell us about planetary fragility? These questions matter not only for Mars but for Earth. Mars is a reminder that habitability is not guaranteed. It is something that can be lost quietly, over time, through small changes that accumulate. Studying Mars helps us understand what conditions keep a planet alive, and what conditions allow life to persist across deep time. Limits also protect what we already have. When we recognize that human biology cannot be easily transplanted elsewhere, we see Earth differently, not as a default setting, but as a rare alignment between planet and organism. That recognition invites care rather than conquest. Exploration guided by limits is calmer. It does not rush. It does not demand impossible outcomes. It moves forward with respect for the systems that make curiosity possible in the first place. At the beginning of this journey, Mars appeared as a quiet possibility, a nearby world that seemed close enough to imagine living on. After moving slowly through biology, development, and time, that image changes. Mars remains fascinating, it remains valuable, but it no longer asks to be inhabited. It asks to be understood. Human bodies are not failures because they cannot live there. They are successes because they work so well here. Their precision, their dependence on stable signals, is what allows thought, memory, cooperation, and rest to exist at all. Seeing this clearly brings a kind of calm. The universe is vast, but life is specific. It flows where conditions allow it to flow, and it rests where balance is sustained. Everything flows. Sleep in that motion,